Imagine a car so refined it made Cadillac uneasy, so powerful it made Chevrolet rethink its place, and so perfectly balanced that Pontiac quietly saw it as competition. Now imagine that same car being buried, not by rivals, but by the very company that built it. That forgotten masterpiece was the 1959 Oldsmobile Super 88, a machine born in an era when Detroit dreamed in chrome, thunder, and jet age ambition. It carried the elegance of a luxury cruiser, the strength of a serious performer, and the quiet confidence of a car that never needed to shout to prove its worth. Yet somehow, it slipped through history almost unnoticed. Not because it lacked talent, but because it had a little too much of it. And today, as collectors race to uncover what GM once tucked into the shadows, the Super 88 has begun to rise again, one restored engine rumble at a time. But to understand why this car became a hidden legend and why its value is climbing now more than ever, we have to go back to the years when Detroit was a battlefield wearing a smile. Because the story of the Super 88 doesn't start with a flaw. It starts with a threat, one GM couldn't afford to admit. 1. Detroit's silent war inside GM. To understand why the 1959 Oldsmobile Super 88 made people inside GM nervous, you have to step into Detroit at a time when the company wasn't just a manufacturer, it was an empire. And inside that empire, every division guarded its territory like royalty. Chevrolet ruled through sheer numbers, flooding American streets with cars anyone could afford. Pontiac was sharpening its identity, preparing to become the rebellious performance hero of the coming decade. Buick sold quiet dignity and upscale comfort. And Cadillac? Cadillac didn't compete with anyone. It simply sat on the throne, untouched and unchallenged. Oldsmobile, however, was placed in the most dangerous position of all, the middle. It was expected to be classy without overshadowing Buick, powerful without outmuscling Pontiac, and refined without ever drifting too close to Cadillac's crown. Every step Oldsmobile took had to be careful, calculated, and politically safe. But the Super 88 wasn't a careful car. It wasn't designed to stay in its lane. It was engineered so well that it started to glow brighter than the divisions GM wanted to protect. Instead of filling a comfortable middle spot, the Super 88 began stepping into territory usually reserved for the kings of the lineup. Its performance challenged Chevrolet's image. Its comfort made Buick uncomfortable, and its quiet luxury came dangerously close to Cadillac's polished perfection. Inside GM, none of that went unnoticed, and as the pressure grew, the Super 88 became something more than a car. It became a problem, one GM didn't know how to handle. But the moment people saw the car itself, everything made sense. Because its design didn't just turn heads, it announced itself. And that's where the real trouble began. 2. The look that made GM nervous. The first time you see the 1959 Super 88, you understand why GM kept a close eye on it. This wasn't a modest family sedan. It looked like something built by a company showing off. Wide, confident, and sculpted with the bold geometry of the jet age. The front end stretched like a chrome command center, anchored by a long grille that carried the same quiet authority you'd expect from a luxury flagship. Even the twin headlamps sat deep inside their bezels, shaped like little turbine intakes, waiting to ignite. From the side, the car didn't hide its size. It celebrated it. The doors were long and heavy, the roofline smooth and steady, and the whole car carried a presence that felt more like a steel cruiser than a simple passenger vehicle. This was the late 50s, a time when America dreamed of rockets, satellites, and a future driven by imagination, and the Super 88 looked like it came directly from that future. Then came the detail that truly separated it from the crowd, the panoramic Vista windshield. It didn't just wrap around. It reached outward, curving into the roofline as if the glass itself wanted to take flight. Paired with the wraparound rear window, the car felt bright, open, and almost cinematic inside. Few cars of its era offered that kind of visibility. Even fewer made it feel like you were sitting inside a moving observation deck. The lines running across the body were clean and direct, part of Oldsmobile's linear look design language, straight, confident strokes that gave the car a modern strength other brands sometimes hid behind fins or ornaments. And while many 59 cars were drowning in oversized fins, the Super 88 dialed it back with subtle, tasteful touches. Even the afterburner-inspired taillamps seemed more like precision engineering than flashy decoration. Hidden in the rear bumper was a small secret, the fuel cap tucked neatly into the center. A tiny decision, but one that showed how carefully the designers wanted the car to appear, sleek, uncluttered, and composed. Everything about the Super 88's appearance communicated the same quiet message. This car doesn't need help standing out. And the real surprise? The inside was even more impressive than the exterior. Because once you stepped into the cabin, you realized Oldsmobile wasn't just challenging GM's styling order, it was challenging Cadillac's comfort. 3. Interior comfort that challenged Cadillac. The moment you sit inside the 1959 Super 88, you understand why collectors still whisper that it came uncomfortably close to Cadillac territory. The cabin didn't feel like something built for the middle of GM's lineup. It felt like a quiet declaration that Oldsmobile was capable of far more than the company ever allowed it to show. The seats were thick, wide, and dressed in two-tone vinyl stitched with the kind of precision normally saved for more expensive models. Instead of feeling like a typical family cruiser, the interior carried the atmosphere of a well-tailored lounge, bright, spacious, and designed for long American roads. The polished metal dashboard stretched across the cabin like a chrome horizon, with its twin contour layout giving the driver a feeling of openness that most 50s cars never achieved. Then your eyes land on the speedometer. Not a simple needle behind a flat pane of glass, but a long bar sweeping over a deep blue background, inspired by aviation instruments. It looked like something pulled from the control panel of a jet-powered dream, and it made even short drives feel like part of a larger journey. The steering wheel was another quiet luxury. 2 spokes, clean and elegant, accented by a horn ring that gleamed under the sunlight. The knobs and switches felt solid, not flashy, just well-crafted. Even the heater controls carried a sense of intention. With Oldsmobile's dual-range setup, you could choose between direct heat or a soft, evenly distributed warmth across the whole cabin. A small detail, but one that revealed how seriously the car approached comfort. And then came the feature that still surprises people today, the transportable radio. A removable unit you could slide out, carry with you, and use anywhere, as if the designers guessed the future long before technology caught up. In 1959, having music that followed you outside the car wasn't just cutting edge. It was almost futuristic. Close the heavy door, and the deep, confident thud tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't thin metal. This wasn't cost-cutting. This was craftsmanship. But here's the part GM didn't want to talk about. Inside this cabin, the line between Oldsmobile and Cadillac wasn't just blurry, it was almost non-existent. And that made things complicated. Because if the interior already felt this refined, what would happen when people discovered what was hidden underneath the bodywork? That answer came from the engineers, and it changed the entire story. 4. The engineering GM didn't advertise. For all the elegance on the surface, the real shock came when you looked beneath the Super 88's polished skin. Oldsmobile engineers had quietly packed the car with technology that most buyers never even knew they were getting, partly because GM never made noise about it. And that silence, intentional or not, is one of the great mysteries surrounding this car. The braking system alone was a sign that Oldsmobile was thinking far ahead of its time. Instead of settling for a standard power-assisted setup, they created air scoop brakes, a vented design that directed cool air straight to the assemblies. In an era when heavy American cars were known for brake fade on long descents, the Super 88 was already solving the problem with engineering that felt more like aviation than automotive tradition. Under the body was the guard beam frame, a rigid X-member structure that gave the car strength without making it feel like a tank on the road. It helped the Super 88 glide across highways while still holding firm in corners, a balance most 50s sedans failed to achieve. Paired with a wide-stance chassis and rubber-mounted body, the ride felt smooth without ever losing that confident, grounded feel drivers loved. Oldsmobile didn't brag about any of this. They simply built it. And the innovations didn't stop there. The drivetrain and rear axle were engineered to give the car grip that surprised test drivers of the time. With the optional anti-spin rear axle, the Super 88 handled slippery roads, heavy loads, and sudden throttle inputs with a maturity more common in performance sedans years later. It was quiet, composed, and predictable, exactly how a powerful family cruiser should behave. Nothing about the engineering screamed for attention. It didn't flash badges. It didn't shout specs. It simply worked, and it worked exceptionally well. But the real revelation appeared when you opened the hood. Because beneath that long jet-age nose sat an engine that didn't just push the Super 88 forward. It reshaped what people expected from a full-size American car. And once drivers felt that power, the internal tension inside GM grew even stronger. The reason? Oldsmobile's greatest weapon was waiting in the engine bay. 5. The Rocket 394 that changed expectations. Lift the hood of the 1959 Super 88, and the first thing you notice is how deliberately everything is arranged. No fuss, no clutter, just solid American engineering built during a time when Detroit believed bigger didn't mean careless and power didn't mean chaos. At the center sat Oldsmobile's pride, the Rocket 394 V8, the most advanced evolution of the Rocket line since its birth at the start of the decade. On paper, the numbers already turned heads: 315 horsepower and 435 lb-ft of torque, but the true magic wasn't in the figures. It was in how the engine delivered that force. This wasn't a jumpy, impatient kind of power. It pushed the car forward with a deep, steady pull, the kind of torque that arrived early and moved the Super 88 like a rolling force of nature. Even now, owners say the engine feels more like a confident hand on your back than a raw shove. Much of that refinement came from the engineering hidden inside. The Rocket 394 featured a larger bore, redesigned combustion chambers, and stronger internal components that allowed the engine to breathe cleaner and respond faster. With the optional quad-jet carb setup, air and fuel flowed with a precision that gave the Super 88 both smooth acceleration and quiet strength, something rare for a car weighing close to 2 tons. Even the intake and valve improvements were intentional, built to give the engine durability that would outlive trends, marketing campaigns, and even the division that created it. Oldsmobile described the crankshaft and block as some of the strongest in the industry, and owners from the era backed that claim for decades. Then you had the Jetaway Hydromatic, a transmission so silky that shifts often went unnoticed. No jerks, no drama. Just a seamless rise in speed as the needle crept across the blue aviation-inspired speedometer. The car didn't rush. It didn't roar. It simply moved with a confidence that felt years ahead of its time. And here's where things get interesting. Some period reviews quietly suggested the Super 88 drove smoother than certain Cadillacs. Not louder, not wilder, smoother. A comment that, even today, feels like a whisper you aren't supposed to repeat too loudly. Because while the Rocket 394 proved Oldsmobile could build an engine worthy of the spotlight, GM had other plans for that spotlight. And this is where the story shifts from engineering brilliance to the corporate politics that shaped the entire GM hierarchy. The car was too good in too many ways. And that created a problem GM didn't want to talk about. 6. How GM quietly buried its own masterpiece. Here's where the story of the Super 88 stops being about engineering and starts becoming something far more complicated. Because while the car itself was impressive, the environment it was born into was even more intense. Inside GM, every division was fighting for identity, budget, and influence. And when a car like the Super 88 started stepping beyond the role it was assigned, the quiet conversations began. Rumors from inside the industry suggest that Cadillac wasn't thrilled about how close Oldsmobile was drifting toward its territory. The Super 88 offered comfort, refinement, and power that brushed against Cadillac prestige, without the Cadillac price. In a company built on strict hierarchy, that wasn't a small issue. It was a threat to the order GM depended on. Reports claim Chevrolet had its own concerns. The Super 88 wasn't affecting Chevy's sales, but its value is starting to raise questions inside GM about why a car priced below the flagship brands was offering performance that rivaled, or even surpassed, more expensive models. Chevy relied on massive volume, and anything that disrupted customer expectations had to be handled very carefully. But the biggest shift came from Pontiac. As the early 1960s approached, Pontiac was transforming into the brand of youth, excitement, and speed. The GTO was about to break through the walls of tradition, and GM needed to push that energy hard. According to unverified accounts, Pontiac was becoming the new golden child, and the marketing spotlight followed. In that climate, Oldsmobile suddenly became difficult to fit into the story GM wanted to tell. Too classy to chase muscle. Too powerful to stay quiet. Too refined to be positioned as affordable. The Super 88 was caught in the narrow space between divisions that GM wanted to grow and divisions GM wanted to protect. So, without any dramatic announcement or corporate speech, something subtle began to happen. Advertising dollars went elsewhere. Brochures became less ambitious. The spotlight faded. Not because the car was a failure, but because it didn't fit the narrative GM needed at the moment. The Super 88 simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time, built too well for a position that didn't reward excellence. And soon, the world around it shifted even faster. Because the decade that followed didn't belong to refinement. It belonged to noise, speed, rebellion, and new identities. And that wave swept the Super 88 straight into the shadows. 7. The fall and the forgotten era. As the 1960s arrived, the entire American car market shifted like a sudden change in weather. Refinement was no longer enough. Subtle luxury wasn't exciting anymore. The younger generation wanted something louder, faster, and more aggressive, cars that didn't glide but growled. Overnight, the spotlight swung away from quiet strength and landed directly on performance and attitude. Pontiac seized that moment like it had been waiting decades. The GTO burst onto the scene and instantly rewrote the rules. It wasn't polite, it didn't whisper, and it definitely didn't care about fitting into a hierarchy. It demanded attention and got it. Chevrolet followed the trend with accessible performance aimed at the masses, giving younger buyers exactly what they wanted for exactly the price they wanted to pay. And Cadillac maintained its luxury throne, untouched by trends and insulated by prestige. Oldsmobile? It found itself stranded between these rising stars. Too refined to become a muscle car hero. Too mature to chase teenagers looking for noise and thrill. Too understated to compete with Cadillac's sharp glamour. Suddenly, the traits that made the Super 88 remarkable, its calm power, its polished ride, its gentlemanly personality, were no longer strengths. The market was hungry for punch, attitude, and bold marketing campaigns. And Oldsmobile wasn't built for that fight. It stayed true to its identity, but the world around it was changing faster than it could adapt. Inside GM, priorities shifted. Marketing budgets flowed heavily toward brands with momentum. Pontiac became the new rock star. Chevrolet held its empire of volume. Cadillac kept the crown polished. And in this reshuffling of attention, Oldsmobile slowly slipped into a quiet corner, respected but unsupported. The Super 88 didn't age poorly. It wasn't outclassed. It didn't lose its quality. It simply stood still in a world that was moving in a completely different direction. While others reinvented themselves, the Super 88 remained what it always was, a car for someone who valued substance over drama. And in a decade obsessed with spectacle, that subtlety became a disadvantage. It wasn't neglected because it failed. It was forgotten because it didn't scream. But time has a way of correcting what hype once overshadowed. And today, the very traits that left the Super 88 behind are the same traits drawing collectors back to it. 8. Legacy of the Super 88. Today, the Oldsmobile Super 88 isn't just a car. It's a story of talent, timing, and circumstance. Collectors aren't chasing it because of flashy marketing or brand prestige. They chase it because of its substance, the solid thud of the doors, the smooth confidence of the Rocket 394, the thoughtful design choices that whispered luxury instead of shouting it. Every curve, every engineered detail, every hidden feature tells the story of a car that quietly outperformed its station. Auctions now reflect that quiet respect. A Super 88 with original chrome, interior, and drivetrain doesn't need showmanship to attract attention. Connoisseurs recognize it as a piece of history, a rare artifact from a time when American automakers experimented, innovated, and built with pride. The value isn't in hype. It's in honesty, durability, and the understated thrill of driving something truly exceptional. The irony is clear. GM once held this car back to protect hierarchy and brand image, but today, that very restraint is what makes the Super 88 so revered. It wasn't meant to dominate headlines in its own era, yet it has now become a symbol of craftsmanship and elegance quietly ahead of its time. The 1959 Super 88 reminds us that greatness isn't always measured by attention or fanfare. Sometimes it's measured by subtlety, precision, and the courage to build something remarkable, even if the world isn't ready to recognize it yet. And for those who understand its story, the car isn't just preserved, it's celebrated. The 1959 Oldsmobile Super 88 wasn't flashy, it didn't chase headlines, and it wasn't built to steal the spotlight. Yet every detail, from its rocket 394 engine to its panoramic windshield, proved it was quietly extraordinary. Today, collectors treasure it not for brand prestige, but for the craftsmanship, refinement, and confidence it still exudes. If you love forgotten classics like this, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe. Share your memories or stories of the Super 88 below. Every experience keeps this legend alive.